Well, thank you for the introduction. I don't think I'll need a microphone. I'm usually pretty loud, so if anyone has trouble hearing me, just stop and let me know. I'm not very good with these, so I may have to go back and forth a couple of times. Anyway, nonetheless, I'm here to talk about brain-computer interface in severely disabled people, and what the research that I've been working on since 2002 has been focused on is helping people with severe disabilities communicate using their brain waves instead of their hands or their muscles. There's 3 different types of brain-computer interface devices in general. One uses EEG recorded from the scalp. One uses microelectrodes implanted into the cortex. And the third kind uses electrode grids placed on top of the dura. Obviously, the latter 2 are invasive methods that require surgery. So one might ask, why would anyone want to have holes drilled into their skull to use a BCI? And that's a pretty good question, I think. And the answer is the people who are using these BCIs are more than likely people with epilepsy who have the implants to monitor epileptic seizures, and while they're waiting and just recording, they can participate in experiments. So that's why the invasive research, how it really got started, and at this time there's a few people in the country and in the world using implanted devices. But the focus of the talk today is on the non-invasive EEG and a specific type of BCI that's related to typing. So non-invasive BCI, you can use the EEG and you can move cursors around the screen, or you can emulate typing. So essentially what it is you use your brain waves to move a cursor on a screen, or you move your brain waves to act, or you use brain waves to act as your fingers to type on a keyboard without muscle movement. I'm going to talk about the latter today. So this is a spelling type device. And you can see here is one of our typical patients, and there's little electrodes embedded in these straps. He's on a ventilator device. His arms and legs are completely paralyzed, and this is the monitor that he would be looking at to spell. Here you can see a screen where he's typing out text. Here is a predictive speller that will populate. So when he types HE, the word the hello will be presented on the screen. So then he can select entire words. I'm not going to show you much of those videos today, mostly because I couldn't find them. Sorry, I have them, but I couldn't find them. So here's a disclosure, conflict of interest. I have none. So just so you know, this is all work that's been funded publicly. And there's also a number of collaborators that I'd like to acknowledge because I will forget at the end if I don't. So Algoma University, George Townsend, he's written a lot of the code. The Aspen Lab is Dean Krasinski. He's written a lot of the software algorithms. So you have a lot of different aspects that go into this kind of research. I'll get to that in a minute. And here's just some of the other collaborators. Since 2006, we've had funding from National Institutes of Health, Biomedical Imaging, Bioengineering, deafness and other communication disorders, and neurological disease and stroke. And if anyone else has really deep pockets and wants to fund some research, I'd be fine too. We'll be willing to accept that. One of the big problems is getting patients to participate in the studies. So here's just professional referrals. You can see we have several different referrals from this area. Helen Hayes Hospital, for example, is in New York. Most of them are relatively local. We've been collaborating with Duke for a long time. So those are essentially the collaborations that we have. And The goal of our lab is to give people a means of communication that's better than their current means of communication at any given time. So for example, if someone's in a severe auto accident or something and comes into the hospital and is intubated and can't speak, maybe can't move, you could imagine they could be given a BCI to be able to communicate while they were in a hospital situation. Or people who have ALS is one of the populations that we mostly work with because they become completely paralyzed and locked into their bodies. So they don't have an ability to move at all. Sometimes people will ask, why would anyone want to use a BCI? It's really slow. You're using signals from the scalp and it goes really slow. Why wouldn't you use something like an eye tracking device where you can track the eye movements? I'll show you an example of an eye tracking device in a few minutes. Anyway, I want to show you this video so you get an understanding of the type of patient that we work with in this research. I think it's, oh, okay. So why do they want BCIs? Other things don't work. I already mentioned that. And we know because they tell us. So this, whoops. See, there I go with my clicker. This gentleman here, his name's Scott Mackler. He was one of our first patients that we worked with. We worked with him from 2006 to 2009, and he used our system. He's actually a neuroscientist who used the system to write a R01 grant. So that's pretty good. Using this system that you can type about 6 characters or 3 words a minute to write an R01 grant. That, by the way, got funded. Is really impressive. So anyway, we know that there aren't options because he used an eye tracking device for several years, and once it failed, he was able to use the BCI in its place. So again, to give you a better idea of what we're dealing with, I want to show you this video because, again, people will say, well, just use something else that works better. So I'm going to try to run this video, and this is the video kind of goes in order, and I did this not on purpose, but it just so happened that the most severe disabled person is the first one, and then they kind of progressively get better. So I just want to show you this. This person we worked with only 2 times, and we were unsuccessful at getting her to be able to communicate. Where's the mouse? Okay. So I'm just giving her the instructions right here. Her eyes are open, barely.
Every time it flashes, say 1, 2.
Again, but we don't know if she's cognitively
3,
aware and functioning.
5, 6.
So this is,
7,
I'm just giving her the instructions
9,
and she's
10,
doing the task.
To look at the
Okay,
camera?
so, yeah, I clicked the wrong place. Sorry about that. So what I'm describing here is you'll hear me ask him to look at the camera, to indicate yes and no by his normal means of communication, and to move his eyes back and forth across the screen. So this is something that what we find is that there's an instrument called the ALS Functional Rating Scale. And if you're perfectly functioning, you would have a 44 on that scale. The people that I'm showing you have zeros on that scale because they can't move, they can't walk upstairs, they can't feed themselves, and so on. So what happens is we basically get to a 0 on the functional rating scale, but as you will see that these different people who have very, very low scores or zeros are quite a bit different in their ability to perform tasks and to move around. So the scale doesn't capture these individuals, and it really needs to go to about -10 instead of 0. So we started later on in the research program to actually film the people that we were working with to capture the differences in their abilities. So just to foreshadow what's going to happen, I'm going to ask him to show me yes. And he's going to twitch his mouth, just that little cheek muscle, twice. And then I'm going to ask him to show me no, and he's going to just twitch it once, or vice versa, I can't remember. And then I'm going to ask him to move his eyes, and you'll see how slowly he moves his eyes from one side to the other. Something that would be really difficult for us to do and jerky. But he's basically saying, eyes move, and he's losing that ability to move his eyes, and they go very slowly. So that's what I want to show you now, if I can find this.
The camera, and just say yes for me. Okay. Now say no. Okay, good. Say yes again. Say no again. Thanks. Look over at David. Thank you. And look back at me. All right, great.
In contrast to what I just showed, this lady here is able to use an eye tracking device. So you can tell right away that she looks much more alert than the first two patients that I showed. And at first you're going to see her eyes moving around. And then it's going to show the screen where she's actually selecting letters based on her eye movements. And when she fixates a certain letter, like the letter A, for example, what's going to happen is it'll grow. And if she fixates there for a second and a half, it'll select the A for her. And it's going to type it into a bar. And then she has the ability to hit another button for it to speak what she's written. So that's what's going to happen here if I don't mess it up. Okay, so you can see how well she can move her eyes back and forth. And now here's the screen that's flashing. So she has the words and letters to choose from.
One of the caregivers cannot use it after 4 years.
No, we experienced that too.
Crud. Okay, let's find our place. So she wrote a sentence, one of our caregivers can't use it after 4 years. What she's referring to is a letterboard. So a letterboard is exactly what it sounds like. It's a board with letters on it. And to communicate, it'll say A, B, C, D, E, F across the top row, just like what I'm going to show you in our screen, and so on with all the letters. You say top row, and then if they want to say yes, they look at you and say yes, and then you would say A, B, C. If they want C, then they look at you again. So this letterboard is, when she isn't able to use her computer, she uses this letterboard to spell out sentences and communicate with caregivers. And she's saying, yeah, I've had one caregiver for 4 years and she still can't figure out how to work it. And some people want to go faster or more slowly. Some people want you to anticipate their sentences. Some people don't. Even when you know the answer, they want to spell it all the way out. And so it's frustrating for the caregiver. It's frustrating for the disabled person. And you have a lot of this, it's kind of like a symphony, and you got to get it orchestrated just right. The next person I'm going to show is, again, a little more.
After 4 years.
No, we experienced that too.
What does yes look like? Yes. Okay, what does no look like? No. All right. And can you look all the way to your left? And then look all the way the other way to your right. Okay, good.
This is an example of a letterboard right here.
2, 3, 4, M. 2, 3, 4, M, N. More open.
Yes.
Okay, so that was one. he had just moved into a new home, and he was really excited because the old house wasn't very easily able to facilitate someone in a wheelchair and navigating around. So he likes this house because it's a lot more open. You can see that was with the letterboard. And this is the system that I described at the beginning, where someone is shown the matrix that they can use to make selections. That is, can't see it really great, but it's right here. The predictive speller is here, and this is what he's writing, which you use the letter, you pay attention to what's flashing, then you can pay attention to what number you want to select if you wanted to choose that word, and then it types into a Word document. So here's what this gentleman, and this is all real time, by the way, so you can see how quickly, or slowly for that matter, that it works. And once again, I pressed the wrong button. Okay, so you can see the letters flashing. When the computer decides to make a selection, talk about that a little bit more, you'll see the big red letter pop up. I'm sorry, green letter. So there's an L, and then he is typing the next character. Which is the number 2. So it selected the second word out of this menu and typed it here. And now he's just going to select a couple of more letters. I don't know if there's audio with this, but there was a T there. And here's what he said.
You gonna keep messing around?
Oh yeah.
All right.
So what does that mean?
Go in here and check my car.
So the dog kept running back and forth by the windows, and he was joking around with Dave, who was conducting a study.
20 times.
I'm going to leave this.
Let's just
We'll never see that video again unless I press the back button. What he was saying, though, is that the dog's running back and forth, and by the way, your car has a flat tire. And then you see Dave walk out to go check to make sure he doesn't actually have a flat tire. So, and that's just how we test and train on the system, is we just say, just tell us something. Just use it to tell us whatever you want. Most of the work goes from the laboratory, then out to the patients. So what we do is we come up with hypotheses of methods that may work better. We test them in the lab on undergrads mainly, or people who are just volunteers. And then the ones that work the best, we say, okay, we're going to take these out to the people who are disabled and continue to test them. So obviously it's very time-consuming and costly to go out into people's homes to do the research. So we have to try to get a good idea of what's going to work best before we do that. So that's kind of the model. Test in the lab and then take it out into the field. So here, this just describes kind of the different steps and people involved. So we have, as you can see, I don't need to read this to you, but a lot of different components. So you can see the flashing matrix, which goes to the subject. He's wearing, or she is wearing, an electrode cap, so you acquire that data. You do some fancy math in these 3 steps, and then it presents feedback to the user, and the process continues. So how does this work? More specifically, rather than the way I've just broadly been describing it. It works on what's called event-related potentials. Event-related potentials are time-locked stimuli or instances to a specific event. So I want you to do this little experiment, and then I'll describe some more about event-related potentials. You can see here there's a box on the screen what's going to happen is X's and O's are going to be presented in that box fairly quickly. Your job is to count the number of X's that appear, okay? So that's all you have to do is count X's. Nice. I wasn't counting. How many was there? 3, 4, something like that? Okay, well, every time you saw that X and you counted it, your brain produced what's called a P300 event-related potential. That's how the system works. So this potential was discovered in 1965. So imagine sitting in a laboratory counting X's and O's for a couple hours. It would be kind of a boring study to participate in, right? So, but that's where this potential comes from in basic science. So we're talking about a basic science phenomenon that 30 years later is translated into a functional communication device. Okay, so what are event-related potentials? They are giving me a hard time. So here you see the same type of a figure. The X's and O's are being presented. We have the EEGs affixed to the scalp. Then you have marker codes that go to the computer to say the X just flashed, the X just flashed, the O just flashed. Well, this is the EEG. Just this random squiggly lines. That's all EEG really is, random squiggly lines. But when you do this time locking procedure, what you get is in this box, you get a specific wave for the time the X is presented right there, and then you get another time-locked event where the X is presented there, and so on. So what you do then is you take these different pieces of information, so for the X, the O, like that, and you take them out 800 milliseconds. So now you have an 800 millisecond chunk of EEG. Well, what do you do with all of these 800 millisecond chunks? Average them together. So when you average these together, if you present 80 O's, you'll have this average from these somewhat random looking events. It will present this. It has different positive and negative amplitudes. I'm not going to discuss that, but the essential one here is the P3 or the P300. You can see this nice positive peak because positive in EEG land is plotted going down. Good reasons for that, but we won't talk about them. Positive is down. The 20 X's are the ones that produce that response. When you saw the X and you counted it, your brain basically said, aha, there it is. That's the one I want to select. So you get this aha response, and that potential is different for the ones that you were counting compared to the ones that you weren't. So that's an event-related potential. Okay, so what? What do you do with that? I'm going to skip this slide. You turn this into, this XO task is called a modified oddball task. You have this random presentation of Nikes, of the letters in a matrix, letters and numbers. So if you were going to focus on the letter P here, you would pay attention to the P, and when it flashes, you would count it just like you were before. So the P is going to produce this P300 when this row flashes, or if I can get this to work right, which I can't, when the column with the D flashes. So that's going to produce that response. So now we took this XO oddball thing and turned it in to a 36 selection grid from 2 responses to 36. And that's how this oddball actually works. And this is a video of someone using this in the lab. And I'm not going to show the whole video, but I just want to show you how this one actually works, because I'm going to talk more about this in a minute. So it's waiting to start. I'll go ahead and tell you what's going to happen. The person who's using the BCI is going to spell out letters. This is in real time again. The sentence that the person's spelling out is, "I want hot wings." So this is in real time, and then it's just I dash. I don't know why we weren't using spaces, but we weren't. So it's each letter is I dash, and then W, A. So if you look at the A now, it flashed twice. Computer made a selection. Now look at the N. Okay, it flashed 4 times. Computer made a selection. Now the T. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The computer detects the response, and so on. So this is how the system works in real time. I'll just skip through the rest of that. This is the electrode montage. I mentioned this. I'm not going to discuss this other than to say that these 3 electrodes in green, FC, CZ, and PZ, can classify most people's responses at about 75% accuracy. So those 3 locations on the scalp do a pretty good job of getting things done. These 3 electrodes, P07, OZ, and P08, also do about 70% accuracy on their own, just 3 electrodes. When we combine the 6 of them, FC, CZ, PZ, P07, P08, and OZ, then we go up to about 100%. What is this telling us? It's telling us that there's certain information that's related, recorded from the midline, and certain information that's recorded from the sides in the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is where visual cortex is. So again, you have to be able to see to use the system, but to use any sort of a BCI, you have to have some kind of sense, whether it's hearing, vision, tactile. You need the different abilities. So that's, so now I want to take a step back and get to a couple of the things that we've done to make the system a lot better and be able to transform it from the lab to bedside. And this is, so I'm going to talk now about a couple of different paradigms, and then I'm going to talk more about some specific case studies of people that we've worked with. So this was the largest gain in performance that we've made with this checkerboard. You can see originally it flashed in rows and columns. So there's a problem with that, because you get a P300. If you're trying to select the D, a P300 occurs when you're looking at the D if the row flashes, and it also occurs when that column's flashing. So now you have to get both of those correct, essentially, to figure out what the letter is. So it's called a checkerboard paradigm, because what we did is we detangled the letters into a checkerboard style matrix. So now you can see here from the white matrix, the backspace, the shift, the H space, and escape, while they're in this row column format, are flashing at different locations on the screen. So now this does a couple of things. One, you don't have distraction from the items that are in the same row and column. And 2, there's much more space between the items that are being presented. So for this study, we'll just focus on the accuracy. The mean was roughly 77% for the row column version and 92 for the checkerboard. So we said this is awesome. We just made a lot of progress. So then we take the checkerboard right out into the homes of the disabled people to test that. Another one that made a big difference is what we call the color flash. So what I've shown you up to this point has been gray characters which intensify to white. So in all of these cases, we were using that. Now when we came to the color flash, we tested our normal gray to white with color to intensified color. So you can see here when the K flashes, I call it a flash, but it's really an intensification. It just changes color to a brighter K. Okay, so this is the color. And the hypothesis for this is that you're going to add color processing information into the stimulus where the brain might react more differentially. And what else you can do with this is make it a little bit more exciting. And then the third condition we used was a gray to color. So you can see when the S flashes, it goes to red. The T goes, look like white there, which are yellow, I don't know. But they all change colors. So, okay, so what happened with this data? Well, we found that when you use the color flash, in this condition, the gray to color, which was the third one I showed you, we're at about 85%. And when you go from gray to white, which is the normal condition, about 80, and about 80 for the color to the color intensified. So again, another improvement. We're making incremental steps in our performance throughout these little manipulations that add up to big performance gains for people who are severely disabled. That's kind of the purpose. Okay, so what's the long-term solution? What's the goal? What are we trying to do? We want to see how long the system can work and how effective it can be. And here's a study from Scott Mackler. The reason that I call him out by name is he was featured on 60 Minutes in 2008. So everyone already knows who he is. And anyway, he's a great guy. But here you can see at month 4, this is what his response looked like to the target item, to the one he wanted to select. And this says month 16. And you can see that these responses look almost identical. And then at month 28, again. So this, what we found with Scott is that this potential that his brain produces is very stable across a long period of time, which is great because that means the system will continue to work for a long period of time. And it might be a little bit hard to see. It is for me standing up here. But what we did for him was we have a 72 matrix selection here, and then one of these, well, this one says TV. So what we did was we provided him with environmental controls. So this is hooked up into an environmental control system. If he selects TV, it spawns a new menu. And so right here it says power, and I can't read these other things, but you can see here he can change the channel by choosing number 6 and then enter. He has volume control here, and there's some lights. He can turn the volume of the TV up and down. He can turn the lights off and on. So he has a lot of control of his environment, in addition to be able to write text messages and emails and R01 grants. So that's one of the things that we've done for the patients. So what else have we learned? Well, one of the things that we learned is not that unlikely when you cannot see very well, the system doesn't work very well. So this is a study where we looked at I don't know, 25 or 30 patients, and here is their the number of subjects and their accuracy. So you can see 5 subjects were accurate less than 10% of the time, another one 10 to 19, another 30 to 39. Here you see a little visual impairment triangle. You notice that all of these subjects who performed at levels lower than 40% had visual impairment. Everyone without visual impairment performed at 70 or higher. Okay, so the main types of visual impairment that the group in this study had were nystagmus, where their eyes randomly move, or ptosis, where their eyes droop and cover part of their eyes. So they have visual impairments. We've done several studies with auditory systems. The problem is you can't put 84 different auditory sounds in a matrix the way you can letters. So the visual system allows you to make 8 selections per minute, whether those are words or individual letters. But the auditory system allows you to maybe make 2 selections a minute from a subset of 5, as opposed to 8 selections a minute from a subset of 82 or some matrix size like that. Okay, so what is one of the solutions? What can we do? Well, one of the things that we can do is take all of these different types of manipulations that have shown to improve performance and put them together and let the subjects use those and choose what they like. So what we found here is for the ALS patients, in the blue, it shows their performance with a standard gray to white flash or intensification. And this, we tested the different variations of the color and the standard, and we found that from the accuracy went from about 80 to about 95. So when you test all of these different types of manipulations and determine which one works the best for them, you have a 15% improvement, which is pretty good. And the preference, lower scores being better here, goes way down for the most accurate system. So that's good. So now we're giving people something that they like, and also something that works much better at the same time. Another case study that I wanted to talk about is one that we did with a gentleman who had a brainstem stroke. He was in the hospital for or in a nursing home for a couple of years, and what we did with him, because we didn't know what he could and couldn't understand, because he had very sporadic responses. So we started off with a visual system with only 4 choices. So you have a Y, an N, and a P, and an E. Well, what in the world is that? This stands for yes, this stands for no, that stands for pass, meaning I don't feel like answering that question right now, and E for N. So what we did was we asked his wife a whole bunch of questions that she knew the answers to, yes and no, and we ran this system 5 times. When he used this 4-choice system, he was 97% correct in those 5 tests. So we said, okay, well, we know he can pay attention. We know that he's answering the questions accurately. So let's see what happens when we go to a more standard 36 matrix grid. We did 6 sessions, only 32% correct. Okay, so what did we find out there? Well, we found out that he can't use a 6x6 matrix, that there's too many items and he can't see that well. So we tested some variants, and then we got to where we figured out that he could use a 3x6 matrix. So here you have, he's spelling the word happy. So you select the H, prints it there, you select the A, it prints it there, and then you have to select next because you only have 18 possibilities on this particular panel. Next spawns this number of 18, and then you would choose PPY, and then you would go back to this matrix or toggle between them. So we provided this toggle system. Now, so what happened here, I don't have the average performance, but 20 of the sessions were successful and 15 failed. So what's going on? Well, we don't know. Quite honestly, we don't know why they failed. But when you look at the ERPs and the EEG responses, you can see that when he was successful for the target, you can see this nice big P300 response. And the non-target is just flat, as you would expect. For the sessions where he failed, there was no P300 response. So this is why it would fail, because there's no discriminatory information in the EEG like there is here. So that's difficult, especially when someone can't communicate. You hook up a system and it works, then great, you know everything's fine. But if it doesn't work, you look at the EEG, now you wonder, well, what was happening? Was he not aware of what was going on at that particular time during that session? Was he not in the mood to do that? You just never know. They leave the TV on the tennis channel in his hospital room or in his nursing home room all the time because his wife knows he likes tennis. But could you imagine having to watch the tennis channel all the time if you didn't want to? I mean, that would be horrible. So he can't say, turn off the damn tennis channel. So some of the messages, there's two things that I want to highlight here. He wrote, Penny, thank you for all of your hard work. They've both been identified, so I can use her name. That's his wife. It took him, there's 39 selections in this message, Penny, thank you for all your hard work. And it took him 100 selections to write that, meaning between toggling back and forth from these two matrices and making errors and correcting them, it took 100 selections, which is probably, in this case, about 20 minutes, I'm gonna guess. And then on June 6th, he says, Dr. S, faster on e-page, where's punctuation? And that was 43 selections, and it took him 60 with the toggling and correcting errors. So that's pretty accurate right there. But you know, the interesting thing about this is, why necessarily would you think he would want to know where to, does he really need punctuation? I mean, he wants to communicate as quickly and as effectively as possible. At the same time, he wants to put a period at the end of a sentence. So it's not the case that you would necessarily think, well, he doesn't need punctuation, it's hard enough and slow enough as it is. No, that's what we find out from them. They tell us what they need and want. Now, over here on the top, July 27th, he asked, can anyone do BCI? 18 selections in this message, 32 total. It took him 24 minutes. Okay, so that's how long it takes to do that. Then, the BCI wasn't working great at that point because that's 18 selections. It took him 32 total, a lot of backspaces. So we got out the ladder board. So me and my colleague, we're standing there with the ladder board, as I described earlier, saying 1, 2, 3, 4, and A, B, C, D, and so on. And we got You've pretty easily. So he spells out Y-O-U, and then V. There's no apostrophe on the board. So we figured out You've, and then okay, so he said You've. Okay, great. And then we get SHA, and we're trying to anticipate what is the word. What is SHA? What would you be spelling SHA? And then we saw the V we figured out V. Well, I had a beard the last time he saw me. And we got to V, and Dave looks at me and he says, "You shaved," because I had a beard for like 6 months. So he's saying, and it's like, oh, you shaved. Well, so what's the point of all this? This is two people interacting with the letterboard and the participant, and it took us 27 minutes to figure out he was trying to tell us you shaved, where when he used the BCI by himself, he was able to type out, "Can anyone do BCI?" in much fewer, 3 fewer minutes, but he did twice as many selections. It only took him 9 selections for the letterboard, but it took 27 minutes. He did 32 selections in 24 with the BCI. So that's where we see that it's really helpful and beneficial for people to have the BCI. So what are the problems? Why don't more people who are disabled have these systems? Well, what we need is low-cost hardware and high-quality hardware to do recordings. This is just another example of the montage here. And these are different systems that you can see. This one has 4 electrodes. The X10 has 10 electrodes. X24 has 24. Well, what's the problem with this? You might notice most of the subjects that need the BCI can't really lay on the back of their head onto this big device. So that's kind of problematic. You need other solutions. Some other solutions that people are looking at would be what's called dry electrodes. The electrodes that we use, you have to put gel in them to get a good connection between the scalp and the actual electrode. So we did a study a while back comparing these dry electrodes, which also you can't lay on because you can see that the little prongs really dig into your scalp and they don't feel well if you lay down against them. So that's a problem. But we did the study. The dry electrodes worked about 80%, and the gel electrodes worked at about 95%. So there's some progress to be made on the dry electrodes. Part of the problems with the wet electrodes is the cleanup. So your hair has a lot of gel in it. Some of you have participated in experiments in my lab, and you know that you have this gel in your hair that you have to go wash out. That can be time-consuming for a caregiver. I mean, you would think, well, this person lays in a bed on a ventilator and they don't have a lot to do. That is just not true. They have physical therapy every day. They have to be bathed, and there's also dressed. Imagine how hard it is to bathe and dress someone with ALS who's completely paralyzed. So there's so much that goes into these people's lives, and they don't have time to wash their hair every day. So that's just one of the things, the realities of the type of technology. So the faster it gets, the more useful we can make it, the more acceptable it'll be, and the more people who will want to use it in the future. I don't know what. So this is sort of like the critical path to success here. We already have, the green line shows us what we have, yellow line shows us what we need, and green lines, red lines would be future things that we need to do. So BCI prototype, we have that. We have the hardware engineering and software engineering, signal processing and applications. So we have a standalone device. And you can do all sorts of things in the realm of gaming with the BCI. Most of that kind of stuff is very simple binary communication. So for example, if I can use my mind to move a ball across the table just by modulating the alpha waves that I'm exhibiting, you can grind your teeth to make a high frequency muscular response and push a ball across the table or lift it up or down. There's some computer games out there. I don't know if anyone's seen them, I don't pay attention to them. But anyway, that's out there. So the other things that we're talking about are, we're kind of here. There's not an FDA approval. I'm not even sure that it's needed at this point, but then to get to widespread use. So that's kind of where we're trying to go, where we've been, and I think I'm just about out of time. I have a few minutes for questions if anyone would like to ask. Yeah?
It seems like everyone's phone has predictive text on it. Are you using a commercial form of that predictive text algorithm?
Yes, we have called WordQ2 is our predictive speller. It's a commercial application that we use for that. A lot of the stuff that we do, we know that we can do that, so we don't necessarily test a lot of that because that's a little bit more on the development side, but sure, we can include that.
And another question, it seems very clunky to be moving between boards, switching. Why don't you just provide more boards?
Bullets.
Boards, B-O-A-R-D-S.
Oh, more boards. Yeah, we can do that.
Would that not be less clunky than having to select a new?
Well, the problem there is, so if we can get essentially a whole keyboard on the display, like the 82 selection is most everything you need from a keyboard. The problem is we switch from board to board when we really get to that limit of about 80, or in the one case that I showed, he wasn't able to use more than 16 or 18 at a time because of his vision or his problems with vision.
And my last question, I noticed you gave an example where you apparently lost the P300, but the P300 is very sensitive to drug effects, both amplitude and what you might call latency. Were you monitoring that?
No, we the amount of drugs that these people we work.
Don't just use the P300 to measure drug effects.
Right, and we have, again, it's just something we haven't had the ability to look at systematically because of the variety of different drugs that people would be on. But I think more of that is not due to drugs, but due to awareness when we see the signal just completely goes away. Because we would still expect to see a lower amplitude or longer latency, P300, if there was some effects going on. But there's so many, I mean, that would be great to look at, for sure.
It'd be fun.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we'd have to kind of know.
Thank you. It's a really interesting research. I'm wondering whether your data collection for the two systems, the one that are based on eye movement, focusing, and the one that you're working on, which is P300, these are single modes of communication, essentially. And have you tried to, it seems to me that speed seems to be a driving force in the research. Have you tried to add an additional mode? For example, you could have an electrode on the mouth, corner of the mouth, and let them maybe duplicate. And each mode gives you more power and speed, so you could twitch your mouth when you want the letter duplicated. If you want to space twitch, combine modes to speed the communication.
Yeah, that's completely possible to do that. And so what you're kind of talking about is multiple data streams to do this. So you could, if your only goal is to get a system that's the most useful for that specific person, then you would want to do that. And some of that has been incorporated into some of the programs that people are conducting around the world. One of the things for us is our unscored R01. We just got that great news. was going to look at combining eye movements, visual acuity, and different types of frequency analysis. So we were going to use frequency, eye movements, and combine this. And then the way that the system would work was if the eye movements are almost perfect, then it would rely on eye movements. As the eye movements degrade, then the EEG would come more in, and so these Bayesian models would test how much, what percentage of this type of signal is being used. And one of the reasons that we've stayed away from muscle, at least in our work, is because eventually it's going to become unreliable. So in practice, I think that's a great idea, but in research, it's a little more difficult to do because now you're really getting into tweaking the system for one specific person, and now we're not really doing research because we're doing case studies, and so it's more difficult. But yeah, it's.
Muscle movement of the eye could be also give you a signal.
Mm-hmm.
Look to the left if you wanted to forward space, look to the right for back space, things like that, to add in to speed medication. The
Yeah.
other question I had is whether you could also, to speed things again, use the phonetic method rather than having people spell out phone, they just F-O-N, and then the computer converts that to.
Yeah, there's been some work on that. So really the thing with the speed is, yes, you can do predictive things, predictive spelling, different things, have the phonetic information, but the bottom line is how many selections can you make per minute? Because you can figure out all kinds of ways to use that information. But if you're limited to 4 selections per minute, here's an example. One of the people that we worked with, he had one selection that said PMU. Well, what is PMU? It stands for pull me up. He was in a recliner, and he would be on a sheet, and he would select PMU when he wanted the caregiver to grab the sheet and pull him back up in the chair. So, there's a lot of information in that one selection. So when you talk about bit rate and things like that, it's sort of, if one selection turns the lights off and you want to go to sleep at night, you can't really measure the bit rate of that. There is a bit rate associated with a single selection, but some selections in practice are worth a lot more information than others. Anything else? Well, thank you for having me. I've enjoyed having you listen to me talk for an hour.